Muy buenos días. Buenos días a todos y todos bienvenidos a esta
Very good
tercera
morning.
sesión de unas
Good morning,
reflexiones y
everyone.
discusiones que
Welcome to
estamos
this
teniendo
third session of
sobre la
some
importancia de las
reflections and
personas indígenas y
discussions
las
we are having
conectividades en el nuevo
on the
marco
importance
de
of indigenous
protección de la
territories and
biodiversidad.
connectivity in the new
Hemos venido hablando ya de esta
framework of
importancia
biodiversity
y hoy
protection.
tenemos unos
We have
ejemplos
already been
concretos,
talking about this
sobre la
importance,
conectividad. Y
and
para esto tenemos un
today we
panel muy
have
especial
concrete examples
en
on
el cual
connectivity.
tenemos
And
el
for that, we
honor
have a
de
very
tener
special
aquí
panel
a
in which we have
Fabián
the
Roda
honor
del
of
NCI,
having
a
Fabián
Corinne
Rodas of
Vriesendoorp
NCI,
del Chicago Museum,
CORINE VRIESENDORP
a Ana
from
María
the Chicago
González
Museum,
del Banco Mundial, del
Ana
programa
María
Sustainable
González
Landscapes y a
from the
Decio
World
Yokota
Bank,
del Iepé.
from the
Todos con
Sustainable
una larga
Landscapes
experiencia
program,
justamente en el tema
and
que
Decio
menciono,
Yokota
de la
from the
conectividad, de cómo
IEPE,
es posible lograr esta
all of them
conectividad,
with
esta
long
articulación a
experience
lo que
on the
podría ser
issue
nuestros
we are
indígenas. Y
addressing,
tenemos el gran honor de
connectivity.
tener con
How is
nosotros
it possible to
a
achieve
Julia
this
Miranda.
connectivity,
Julia
this
Miranda es alguien con una
connection,
larga
protected
experiencia
areas
en
and indigenous
protección
territories?
y
And we have the
conservación del
great
medio
honor of
ambiente.
having with
Ya
us
de
Julia
30
Miranda,
años
who is someone
fácilmente,
with a
de la
long
cual la
experience
mitad
in
del tiempo,
protecting and preserving the
16 años,
environment
estuvo
for
de
over 30
director de
years,
parques
in
nacionales
which
naturales
half of that
articulados. Y
time,
durante su
for
periodo hizo un
16
aporte
years, she
sumamente
was
importante
director of
bajo su
National Natural
administración se
Parks
crearon,
here
si
in
no me
Colombia.
equivoco, 13
During
parques
her
nacionales.
tenure, she made
Pero además
a
de crear parques
contribution
nacionales,
extremely
creo
important,
yo que las cosas más
and
importantes
13
fue que hizo
national
un
parks were
salto
created. But in addition
cualitativo
to creating
en todo
national
ese
parks,
concepto de parques
I think the
nacionales
most
a nivel
important
mundial,
thing
en donde
was that she made a
articuló realmente la
qualitative leap
participación
in the
indígena,
whole
no
concept
a
of
nivel
national
de movimiento
parks
interno, a nivel de
worldwide,
trabajar,
in which
sino como la
it was able
construcción a
to
partir
really
del pensamiento
articulate
indígena,
indigenous
de la visión
participation, not at a
indígena,
level of
para que no
tourism,
estuviéramos
but
solo
at the
trabajando desde la
conception
perspectiva de
based on
ciencia y de
indigenous
tecnología,
thinking, the indigenous
sino que
vision, so
una
that
nueva
we
visión,
were
un nuevo
not just
paradigma.
working in science and
Entonces,
technology
es un honor tener a
perspective,
Julia
but
aquí
under
con
a new
nosotros
vision, a
y
new
gracias
paradigm.
por participar
So it
y
is an
por
honor to have
moderar esta
Julia here
sesión.
with us,
Entonces, Julia,
and thank you
te paso la
for
palabra.
participating and moderating this session. Julia, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Martin, for your generous words and for the invitation to this magnificent panel with field experts, the real heroes of conservation, who are the people here with us today because they have the experience of working at a local level. This is a very important moment for this panel because we all know that we are getting ready for the decisions that will be made at the COP, the next COP 15 that should have been last year, but it will be this year, where the goals for the next 10 years will be negotiated. And we can see that the previous goals, which we tried so hard to meet, those from 2010 to 2020, the Aichi targets, were not enough to curb the loss of biodiversity, to tackle climate change, to address the degradation of ecosystems. So the challenge we have as countries, as organizations, of providing the best possible knowledge to negotiate the best goals for the next 10 years, given the possibility of reaching 2030 in a better position than we are right now, and see if we achieve that ambition of that great revolution of reaching 2050, living in harmony with nature. And that is a huge challenge to we must all contribute. Martin, I think all this panel and everything that you have organized from Gaia and the allies that you and we have, because I consider myself an honorably part of the board, I was invited to participate. It can contribute a lot to illustrate with concrete examples, as you will said, with all the technical, scientific thinking, and especially at this moment with ancestral thinking. how can we manage to negotiate as ambitious as mankind as possible in order to move forward and stop this deterioration that we have not managed to slow down until now. So this wonderful panel in which we are going to have these concrete examples on how the Amazon is well connected between protected areas, indigenous territories, with the right knowledge about conservation, but above all, with all the contribution and ancestral knowledge, can achieve very successful examples in terms of real connectivity, because we know that in addition, the areas individually considered as islands fail to slow down or meet these goals. It is necessary to build these connectivity corridors or conservation corridors as the initiatives that we will be able to see today. So we have here with us Francisco von Hildebrand from Gaia Amazonas, Fabián Rodas, CORINE VRIESENDORP, Decio Yokota, and Ana Maria Gonzalez, who are going to tell us about their experiences, their extensive experiences, and we will be able to hear from them everything they have to provide us to move towards our purpose that we have. We are committed to contributing to the negotiation that will take place this year. So let's start with a testimony from Francisco, who is currently the executive director of Gaia Amazonas Foundation. Francisco is a professional in development studies and an expert specialized in local development strategies, local governance, and intercultural environmental management, with a strong emphasis on research and community participation. He currently leads in Gaia an interdisciplinary team of more than 80 people who are working on the recognition and implementation of indigenous territories and their government figures. I also think that Francisco had to actually begin in those regions with all the knowledge that Martin has given to him through his life. He has a lot to tell us. Let's hear from Francisco. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Julia, for the introduction. Here I am with you with this pre-recorded video, as I am currently in the Amazon in assembly with indigenous authorities. I would like to share with you these few minutes the experience that we have had from the Gaia Foundation with the authorities, leaders, communities in Apaporis River, where since 2008, when became a national park, not only because of its ethnic and environmental importance and the Yaigoje-Apaporis Park, but also because of the cultural importance of the indigenous knowledge that are still alive and remain the guidance of environmental management, the relation between people, nature, and importance of the sacred sites that are located in the park. Sacred sites that are absolutely fundamental for more than 17 ethnic groups. And it is for this reason that indigenous peoples and national parks began a conversation, a joint construction, a whole process of prior consultation that took more than 2 years from 2006 to 2008 for the creation of the Yaigoje-Apaporis Park in 2008, which under the agreement established between national parks and indigenous authorities, it is to be governed by environmental management based on indigenous people's traditional knowledge systems. This entails a process of joint construction between indigenous authorities, indigenous youth, men and women with their specific knowledge of environmental management, public authorities of national parks, a real learning on how to build from the diversity, from different knowledge systems, a co-governance of a national park based on indigenous principles and values. Between 2009 and 2018, An articulated work was carried out among the communities, national park officials, also with the Gaia Foundation of internal research, endogenous research, in which hundreds of young people worked with hundreds of knowledge holders, knowledge of traditional environmental management, knowledge that was encoded in stories, narrative, myths, rituals, and the different practices of communities. It was a process of investigation, registering, transcribing, mapping this knowledge in a certain way, decoding what that knowledge and ancestral management of indigenous peoples about the Amazon, and recoding it into intercultural patterns in a way that truly achieved an understanding between the indigenous environmental management system and the exercise of authority environmental by national parks and also indigenous authorities. This was a phenomenal process. It was a learning work not only among the young generations and older generations of indigenous peoples, men and women, but also learning for national parks about how to imagine new, totally innovative environmental management schemes for the Western world, where the territory is a living agent, where the territory is interconnected or systems of sacred sites, where the territory is dynamic and changes management depending on the times of the year, behavior, climate, not over the years where we have an adaptive management, a dynamic management of this relationship between humans and nature, where nature is not an object to be handled or used, but a subject. They are communities, animals, river, forest communities, with which one has a dynamic relationship to ensure life, reproduction of life, and continuity of life as a result of this joint work. In 2018, the Special Management Regime was signed. It is a special management regime that is unique at a global level because there are other exercises of co-governance between indigenous peoples and environmental authorities, but this co-governance is often reduced more to administrative positions, to positions of environmental monitoring roles and functions where indigenous peoples participate in the management of the park, but under a more non-indigenous structure. In this case, both the structure, the system, the management plan, the special park management regime is entirely based on traditional indigenous systems, food sovereignty, the management of sacred sites, cultural calendars, when rituals or traditional activities are made, that there are the ones that set the patterns of social behavior depending on the health and dynamics of ecosystems. And these environmental control patterns are coordinated among indigenous peoples and national parks. In that sense, it is a real co-government. It is a co-government between environmental authorities, the National Parks Environmental Authority, the indigenous environmental authorities of the Yaigoje-Apaporis Park. And this is an innovative proposal. It is a proposal that not only provides the best of indigenous knowledge and the best of Western knowledge for an accepted, flexible, well-founded management of the Amazon, but it is also innovative in that it is possible to build co-governance between indigenous and state. Diversity can be in conflict, as we only see it many indigenous scenarios in the Amazon basin, or maybe in dialogue and conversation. No culture has the answer to all the challenges that we are experiencing in the Amazon, and putting these knowledge systems or different knowledge systems into debate and conversation, it is the best way to innovate not only environmental management models, but even the Amazon development model. For us, this has been an absolutely magical process of learning with indigenous people, with the state, of building new ways of understanding each other, new ways of articulating different views of the territory, different relations with the territory, with the Amazon, different relations of the exercise of environmental authority from diversity. And this is not only a co-government model between indigenous and central state, but it is also a model of co-government within the framework of an Amazonian development agenda based on indigenous knowledge, values, and principles that have kept the forest standing. Another fundamental element of the management of the park is how it is framed in a much larger ancestral management unit. The park has 1 million hectares, but there is a cultural connectivity, environmental connectivity that goes beyond the park. And this management area or collective management area between different ethnic groups is called the macro territory of the Apaporis Yaigoje, which there is no only cultural affinity, but there is an interconnection between sacred sites, migratory routes of animals, cultural management carried out by the different ethnic groups that are in this territory. And that articulation between Yaigoje management and also, which are also based on ancestral systems and indigenous territories, this large macro territory allows not only ecosystem connectivity but also cultural connectivity, which is the basis for successful and continuous management of Amazonian ecosystems, as the indigenous peoples have demonstrated for thousands of years. And if we put together these mosaics of protected areas, indigenous territories, and the macro territory protected such as Chiribiquete, we will consolidate a corridor that goes from the borders with Brazil to Peru to almost the foot of the mountain of the Indian Amazonian with more than 12 million hectares. And if we add to that the map and we connect it with indigenous territories in Brazil, here is a truly super interesting, innovative proposal. We have to learn how to apply it, not only for national parks in indigenous territories, but to actually build schemes of social environmental co-government among indigenous peoples of state, whether it is a park, an indigenous territory, the communities, or indigenous governments, depending on the legal framework of each country. The example of the Yaigoje-Apaporis is a model for the Amazon, a model for the management of parks, a model for government among indigenous territories, a model for Colombia and for other countries. We can build new environmental management and coordination schemes between indigenous peoples and the state to ensure social and environmental welfare in the Amazon. I hope I not surpassed the time. Thank you very much. I wish you all an excellent panel, and I hope soon to see you all again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francisco. Your detailed description is accurate and is undoubtedly a successful, inspiring example that can be replicated, and in fact, in Colombia has been replicated in other national parks. And it also talks about that ecological, social, and cultural connectivity that provides real and concrete results. Thank you very much. Well, let's continue with Fabián Rodas. Fabián, who is here with us, has been working in university teaching, scientific research on avifauna, and ecosystem conservation. It is related to nature and international culture. He has supported the creation of the Ecuadorian regulations to establish connectivity corridors and coordinated the connectivity corridor process Sangay-Podocarpus. Did I say it well, Fabián? Yes, very good. He is currently coordinating the initiative for the Andean cross-border connectivity corridor between Ecuador and Peru. Go ahead, Fabián, with your presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Julia. Thanks to Gaia for the invitation and allowing me to participate in this important meeting. I will now share my screen for the presentation. I would like to mention some of the advances we have made in a very important area of the Andean Amazonian corridor, which are the headwaters of the basin, where the waters are born. And that's why the reason of the title of this presentation. Nature and International Culture is an NGO originally from the Mayor South of Ecuador, created in 1997, and with states, local governments, collaborators in different countries. It's being able to extend the management to other spaces in Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil, and Mexico, preserving biologically diverse landscapes in Latin America in alliance with local cultures for the well-being of the planet. And of course, we are members of the North Amazon Alliance. You may know this map, which is very important. It portrays all the advances that we've made in the formation of the Andean Amazonian corridors. And here there are also some of the proposals that we are making towards the global framework of biodiversity post-2020, especially in the topics of social, cultural, ecosystem connectivity, where we ask to strengthen this vision. The aim is also to preserve all the intact areas that exist in these territories, not only some of the areas, the intact areas, but hopefully all the areas that are intact and primary forest, where we seek the linkage of territories and the management of indigenous peoples are essential for the protection of these ecosystems. And finally, with the vision of protecting what we call the flying river, an incredible amount of water that flows through this space and is related to the good health of ecosystems. I would like to concentrate now on the upper part of the basin, where we have this oval red, not on territories that correspond to Colombia, Ecuador, or Peru, to show you some of the experiences there. And these are the ecosystems. They are mountainous here, therefore water resources are extremely abundant, and undoubtedly they are very threatened as well. On this map of Ecuador, we did an exercise recently to find out what are the areas of water importance in the country where we must concentrate conservation efforts. And we can see the entire Andes mountain range. It is obviously a fundamental territory for water resources. And this is where, between all countries and Ecuador, this abundant river is born. The landscape looks like this: beautiful forests, mountains, very, very large rivers, where the riverbeds are formed, which then reach the Amazon. Now I want to focus on the space in the Ecuador area called Morona Santiago. This is a state in the Amazon, and what you see in green are the protected areas under the Ecuadorian national system, and we see that there are large conservation gaps, especially here in the Amazon territory and also in the Andean territory in the mountains. As you can see, we don't have large protected areas from the center to the south as they do exist from the center to the north. So here is a corridor practically formed from Sangay National Park to the north of Colombia, but from Sangay to the south there was still much to do. So what we decided was to act locally with complementary conservation strategies and local planning tools. So now I'm going to focus on Morona Santiago area to show you what we have been able to do in recent years. This is the state which has 256,900 hectares, the Sangay National Park, which is a fairly large and very important area. And what we have been working in each territory with municipalities, the central state, is the following. We did not have since 2013. We started these processes where municipalities created these protected areas through local planning tools. We see the different years now when these conservation areas have been formed, and even a national park, the Rio Negro Sopladora, with the central state. And we began to fill in these gaps to Pan, Santiago, and ended here with the connectivity corridor Sangay-Podocarpus, which we'll see other maps. This is the progress we've made so far, not working for several years with local governments, ordinances, and planning tools. There are other spaces where we continue to work, and now we are going to begin with the Amazon part where the indigenous communities are located. This is mainly the Mestizo people territory in indigenous communities. There's a little more to do in the Amazon, but there is an ecosystem and functional connection that we must protect in these territories in order to promote all environmental services that flow into the Amazon and indigenous territories. We now have 33,000 hectares within the national system protected areas. The municipalities have created 176,000 hectares. We're trying to incorporate 49,000 hectares, of which are municipal, in order to strengthen them in the management and corridors. It is actually 570,000 hectares in total. And now we are going to the corridor, which is a territory that is immediately south. As we saw, there is a conservation vacuum, and we have also worked on it to fill this space from the local management with each of and one of the territories. So obviously this is a job that takes quite a long time and quite a lot of perseverance, because sometimes there are processes that are frustrated that by institutional political issues, changes of government, among other things. So what we have achieved so far in this territory, and here you can see it in red, it is a territory of great water importance. 30% could even be 35% of the hydro energy produced in Ecuador. It comes from this territory. Here we have the most important water sources of hydro energy in the country. And what we have been progressing also in many years of work, is in this area, in this green area, that areas that are under the conservation figure, and dark areas are within the national system of protected areas, and that is the highest category where you cannot do any kind of extraction, forestry, or any kind. These are conservation territories. The rest are in the process of strengthening and with the local management, which is key. Here in the graph, we can see in the bars the different municipalities that are part of the corridor. It is a municipality, which is a territorial area of management. It is a space of political management. And we have several of these municipalities that already meet more than 30%, which is the goal that is being proposed post 2020. That is, of the total municipal territory, there are 12 municipalities out of 16 that are here, which already exceed the target, the 30% conservation territories. And I think this is very relevant because at the national level, it is certainly a little more complex to reach the finish line. But if we work and focus on the fact that these municipalities of these territories, which are water sources, connectivity territories, areas of importance for biodiversity, having in their planning conservation, and that understanding that it must be done by nature ecosystem, we can exceed this goal by 30%. And some of municipalities exceed 80% because they are mountainous areas, areas that are difficult to access, areas that must be destined for conservation because that is the vocation of their territory and soil. So I think that the approach of working locally, from as local as possible, can make us achieve this goal and even overcome it. The connective corridor of Sangay-Podocarpus is the first recognized in Ecuador, and it's already a good area that is protected. Here we see the mosaics that are covering a large part of the territory at the head of the basins. And the next steps, and the Amazon Alliance, we're looking for an escalation of this experience, and the next step we are seeing is with Peru to form an Andean connectivity corridor that includes the southern part of Ecuador and northern Peru. So finally, in conclusion, this is the inaction from the local to the global or glocal. I think it is essential to have creative conservation figures and complementary strategies from municipalities, from the smallest possible communities, to involve local governments within the framework of their competencies to maintain this flow and this water ecosystem and social-cultural connectivity. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that huge effort that you are making. It is an effort that engages people, governments. I think that you have shown us an example that can be followed and should be followed. The work at a local level and with the government. Thank you very much, Fabián. So next we have CORINE VRIESENDORP. CORINE is the director of the Andes Amazonian program at the Center for Science and Action in the Film Museum in Chicago, in the United States. She is a country biologist with 30 years of experience in flora and vegetation of the most remote corners of the western Amazon. She works closely with South American partners to ensure that science supports the conservation and quality of life of the local population. For the past 5 years, CORINE has worked very enthusiastically and with a large herd of people, as she says, a great herd of people to achieve the dream of the great biocultural corridor of the Putumayo Basin. Welcome, CORINE. You have the floor. Thank you, Julia. Thanks to the Gaia Foundation. Greetings to everyone. I am very honored to be part of this group. So, I am going to talk about a dream, a big dream that began small and got big. It is a dream on how to create a biocultural corridor in the Putumayo Isa, an area of 12 million hectares. And it is also an invitation because it is not done yet, an invitation for people to join this effort. And how did it start? The Putumayo Basin has been an unknown place for many, many years because for Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, that area was the most remote part of their territories. And since 2001, we have worked with more than 130 scientists creating rapid social biological inventories in this basin. So there is already a new knowledge. But we didn't have a big plan. Since many opportunities appeared to do research in these places and to contribute to supporting the creation of new areas. In recent years, the governments of Ecuador and Peru created 8 new protected areas between or very close to this basin, about 2.7 million hectares. And it was filling up, but it was very little by little. And during those years, it was very important to create teams of experts who were mostly from those countries to really understand geology, flora, fauna, people, their aspirations in each of those places. And something happened. 2 very important things happened to change our focus from area by area to something much bigger. The first thing was a jaguar. The social team saw a jaguar crossing the Putumayo. He left Peru, it swam the whole Great Putumayo, and arrived in Colombia. He didn't have a passport or an ID card or any identification. For him, well, actually for her, I think it was a she, there is no such border. We don't have to think of the river as a barrier. It is something that connects. And secondly, that same social team, after seeing the jaguar, said, why don't we cross? They were taking an inventory in Peru, so why not talk to the people on the other side? So in 2016, they took people from the Peruvian side, from the Peruvian native communities, to talk to people in Maloca, Puerto Rico, in Colombia. And then we began to understand, we started to understand these connections are very strong. We can be considering a country as a country, the Putumayo. The Putumayo is about connectivity, the links, the ties, and that made it important to focus on seeing everything in the Putumayo basin. What is it there? So there is a forest, a sea of forest, a sea of green that extends to the horizon. It is a place with very little deforestation, only the headlands. It's got some deforestation, but it's completely covered in forest. It is a place of high diversity. If we look at the red dots on each of these maps, be it amphibians, mammals, birds, trees, the most saturated place is a more diverse place. And if we look at Putumayo, the Amazon is not only the most diverse place in the world, but Putumayo is the most diverse corner of the world, most diverse place. And this is incredible. If we consider carbon, Putumayo is not the place with the most surface carbon in the Amazon. It is it holds a secondary position, but it is still very high in carbon and had something different, which are the boglands, which is carbon below ground. And there are places in Putumayo where you have 3 meters of carbon below, 3 meters of bog, carbon below ground. This is super important. Also, the people. There are more than 20 indigenous peoples who make in Putumayo their home, their territory, their place of cultural importance, and we have had the opportunity to work with many of them. So when we started looking at everything, it was really amazing. So from there, we began to wonder, how do we make this a great vision among all of us? How do we all ride the same canoe to row together? How did you build something like that? I didn't have any experience in that. I am an ecologist who works at a museum, but we thought it was important to give it a try because this place was so important. So we started by deciding to invite people from the Colombian and Peruvian side of the Cuenca to sit down and talk. Not just from the government or NGOs or local populations, but all at the same time. It was more expensive, it was riskier, because it could be a total failure. Instead, it was amazing. It made us feel that from the first moment, everyone felt invited and part of something. And those encounters had a strength, a force, because we were all together in a large group, listening to each other, but much of the strength was also in these meetings between indigenous people on the Peruvian side with people from Colombia's national parks, for example, indigenous people on the Colombian side talking to Peruvian NGOs. And then we began to build a dialogue that has been very, very important. One of the things that we did at the last meeting, and for people who know Peruvian facilitator Charola now, who is someone really spectacular, this was initially called the Statement by Putumayo, or the Putumayo Statement, and she said, no, this is actually a love letter. So this is the love letter to Putumayo Isa, And this is something we all agree with, from the local population, indigenous federations, peasants, and even NGOs and the government, the Peruvian and Colombian government, the biological and cultural corridor of Putumayo, which is not yet formally recognized, represents a unique opportunity to maintain the free flow of a main river in the Amazon basin. And that's super important. There are no hydroelectric plants or proposals here. It is an Indian river that still flows freely. The corridor stands out for its high diversity of flora and fauna, the cultural traditions and knowledge of the people who inhabit it, the health and connectivity of its forests and bodies of water, additionally, its potential to mitigate climate change. And it's all in one: biodiversity, cultural traditions, connection with forests, bodies of water, health, and all the carbon that's there. The integrity of the corridor in the long term is essential to promote the well-being of the peasant and indigenous population, to promote the survival of indigenous peoples, the spiritual and cultural connection with land management, and promote the proper use of natural resources and their sustainable use for local populations. And how all of this will going to be achieved through integrated management between neighboring countries, shared governance between local people, state, civil society based on the principles of inclusion, always respecting to the long-term conservation and approach. And that is our dream. We are not there yet. We need to involve the people of Ecuador, the people of Brazil. But the vision is there, and that is the beauty of this effort. To feel like everyone contributes, that everyone adds up, and we really need a shared vision to be able to achieve something very amazing. That would be a whole basin, the Putumayo-Isa basin, preserved under this long-term vision. And after bringing all these people together in Peru and Colombia, we sat down and looked all over the corridor. And we realized that there is a whole mosaic of indigenous territories, protected areas, areas that are proposed but not yet created, and also the headwaters, and in the lower part, other land uses. It could be public lands, oil concessions, forest concessions. And when you look at the entire basin, 40% are already indigenous territories, 20% are already under protected areas, 60% of that basin is already protected. And in orange, there are the proposed areas in Peru. So we are talking about a basin that would have 3/4 of the basin under some kind of protection, and that is incredible. And there are other incredible reasons to protect this basin. That's it. Thank you very much. This is fantastic, and to finish with this love letter to Putumayo is very inspiring. What a wonderful initiative with real results, and we hope it will come true soon, the whole corridor that you are proposing. Thank you very much, Corine. Thank you. Well, we're going to continue now with the participation of Decio Yokota. Decio is an economist in training. After more than 10 years working in information technology, he dedicated to agroecology, especially agroforestry, with traditional agricultural communities in the Cerrado, Goiás, and Vale do Ribeira in São Paulo. Since 2007, Decio has been working with indigenous peoples and other communities in the interior of Amapá and northern Pará in the Brazilian Amazon through the IEPE, the Institute for Research and Indigenous Information. Welcome, Decio. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to come and talk about protected areas in our small corner of Brazil, where the IEP operates. I would like to thank Gaia's leadership, especially for this initiative in these webinars. My name is Decio. I live in Brazil. I have been working at the IEPE since 2007, and I have followed closely from the beginning this experience of the Eastern Amazon Mosaic, which we are going to talk about today. This is where we work, and the mosaic is specifically found in this region, in the Brazilian Amazon, where the states of Amapá and the state of Pará are located, and where we work in a specific region of the Pará state, which is the north, as well as with the state of Amapá. This is a region that has historically been inhabited by various indigenous ethnic groups that were protected from colonization. It is a region that is very difficult to access due to waterfalls and the jungle. And most of these ethnic groups do not only live in the Brazilian border, but also in other neighboring countries, within the Guyana Plateau, which is the French Guiana, Suriname, Guyana. Most of them share this wider territory. I am now going to quickly show you the history of the formation of protected areas in this region. The first protected areas began in the 70s, first with the natural reserve, the Sipi-Paliwini, in the Suriname border, in the 80s. And at that time, we had the first conservation units on the Brazilian side, and most importantly, the first indigenous land in this region that was approved in 1982. Here on the border, also with the French Guiana. In the 90s, we had a great recognition of more indigenous territories in this region. The whole Tucumumaque Park and up to the Guajapi land. And in the 2000s, until today, we have seen the formation of this continuum of protected areas. That is, most of the protected areas, both in area and in number, have a fairly recent recognition in this region. And this map shows the general protected areas for the entire Brazilian Amazon. Here we have the deforestation data accumulated up to last year, which clearly show the effectiveness offered by more protected areas in the Brazilian Amazon, both for protection and specifically against deforestation. Here we see indigenous territories or indigenous lands, as they are called in Brazil, in light green, and in dark green we have conservation units. So returning here to our region, we have a continuum of legally protected territories, not only on our side of the border, but also from neighboring countries, around 411,000 square kilometers continuous, formed by conservation units, indigenous lands, but also some territories of moronic communities that are also legally protected in Brazil. These are territories that are occupied by descendants of slaves who fled during the time of slavery in Brazil. And within this region, we specifically highlight the mosaic of the Eastern Amazon that covers some of these conservation units. And that story begins with the neighborhood interaction, or that positive relationship between these two conservation units, the Tucumbu-Maque Mountains National Park to the Guajapi indigenous land. Here I want to highlight some of the reasons that have contributed a lot to the first construction. One of those is the National Park Tumucumaque, which was created in 2002. It was the greatest national park in the world, which made it relevant within Brazil and actually received additional resources. Also, one team was able to create a management plan that is an instrument within the law for the management of the territory, because it is very sensitive to the issue of the environment and the indigenous ethnic groups living in this area, and a very active council that allowed for the sharing the management of the territory. On the other hand, within the Guajapi indigenous land, an indigenous land that has a process of legal recognition already completed, there was no territorial dispute, unlike other places in the Brazilian Amazon, but with a large awareness of the management of this territory. There was even a strategy of redispersion in this territory and occupation of its boundaries, which was complementary to the same strategy of the national park for the management of that territory. And I would like to quickly show you a timeline on the creation of the mosaic to show you that it has been a long process of articulation, not only within the territory, but also with the governmental bodies responsible for this management, and that recognition that it began in 2008. That is 7 years later. In fact, we had a formal recognition from the government of this mosaic. And that was also due to the fragility that Brazilian legislation has for the recognition of protected areas. In Brazil, there is such recognition of conservation units, but what would be other protected areas, such as maroon territories and indigenous lands, it is not very clear, which makes this positive interaction very difficult. Here we see the diversity of this mosaic within these 3 indigenous lands. We have 5 ethnic groups, but there are other traditional communities there, such as the extractivists, also settled in agrarian reform. And the heart of this mosaic is its council. It is part of the legal recognition. And the council is a joint council divided between government organizations and representatives of civil society. 5 indigenous representation figures, 5 for castañeros, extractivists, and other for settled extractivists. And from that recognition, even a little earlier, we have a fairly long history of meetings, trainings, exchanges, links with the government in Brasilia, of carrying out various joint activities with the monitoring of garimpeiros, mercury pollution monitoring and control actions, accumulating that have gone through the course of that time. And finally, I wanted to highlight the presence of other mosaics in Brazil. Not only we consider the ones from the Amazon, but also other Brazilian biomes. Unfortunately, one of the most important difficulties in the current government in that participation of civil society is that at the moment, for example, we have a legal dispute within Brazil, not only from the Mosaic councils, but from other councils that allow civil society participation and have been temporarily revoked and are in a judicial dispute with the current government to take back these spaces for citizenship within our country. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Decio. Such an interesting experience, and we know that these efforts by civil society in Brazil become even more impactful because of the guidance given from the national government and in most institutions. Thank you very much for your presentation. We now move forward with Ana Maria Gonzalez. Ana Maria has worked since 2008 in the World Bank on conservation and sustainable development projects in Africa and Latin American regions. She is currently a senior environmental specialist and coordinator of the Sustainable Landscapes of the Amazon program, funded by GEF resources from the Global Environment Facility. This program currently includes projects in Colombia, Peru, and Brazil, and it includes a second phase in which Ecuador, Bolivia, Guyana, and Suriname will join. She previously worked at the Nature Conservancy and in her home country in multiple public research organizations and civil society. Welcome, Ana Maria. We are eager to hear what you have to say. Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you, everyone, for the presentation. Thanks, Julia, for your presentation. Indeed, I am the coordinator within the World Bank for the Sustainable Landscape Program of the Amazon, and I want to tell you very briefly the interpretation and approximation of the landscape scale and interventions that the program in the national projects has promoted. Also, as Julia said, this is an impact program funded by the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, as it is known in English, and consists of 5 national projects currently in Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, which are led by the ministries of the environment in each country, but there are both public and private agencies, as well as civil society, that help implement national projects. The World Bank is the leading agency for the entire program, but at a national project level, we also work in partnership with UNDP and WWF for the preparation and monitoring of these national projects. And we are celebrating that very soon, and maybe this year or later, next year, we are going to start with new projects. In addition to being maintained, there are new projects in Colombia, Brazil, and Peru. Also, to the program, Bolivia, Ecuador, Guyana, Suriname, and are integrated. So the purpose of the program, the ESL by its acronym in English, it is to improve the integrated landscape of management and ecosystem conservation in prioritized areas in the Amazon. So this program is designed under 4 pillars that are interrelated. On one hand, we have the protection and conservation and effective management of areas under different conservation regimes, national, regional, indigenous territories, Ramsar sites, among others. Another pillar that focuses on sustainable production, sustainable management of agricultural land, forest land, restoration of degraded areas, as well as conservation and sustainable use, or the control of degradation over the aquatic ecosystems. This conservation and production is sustainable. Its enabling conditions can be found in this 3rd pillar, which is that of multisectoral policies, incentives, and strategies, so it can be possible for these interventions. And finally, capacity building and regional collaboration between countries and among different actors involved, as they are partners or herds, as Corine would say. The project and previous presentations gave us a very clear picture of the importance of connecting geographies, connecting corridors, both land and aquatic resources, and hopefully they remain uninterrupted. And ASL has supported several of these initiatives. On the one hand, and I'm going to extend because we already heard the Corine's amazing presentation, but we have the cultural and biological corridor of the Putumayo-Isa Basin, integrating or escalating this project and strengthening this process that began between Colombia and Peru, but now expanding to the borders of Ecuador and Brazil. Additionally, in Colombia, the initiatives supported by SL in restoration, conservation, and sustainable management are prioritized under ecological connectivity criteria in different corridors within the Colombian Amazon. But beyond these territorial agreements, the focus and emphasis and vision it has and the approach that the SL has in relation to the agreements, and that is where our actions are focused. The main challenge of the program is to seek concerted solutions within the territory, for the territory, and for the territory of in a collaborative way, which is consistent with sustainable development and conservation. Since there are several types of agreements that are being promoted within the program, looking for that connectivity of landscapes. On some sites, there are then conservation agreements with the local level where farmers and fishermen agree and undertake to conserve, restore, and establish sustainable fishing practices. So they are connecting under the same vision, starting with the micro, with the landscape, the individual decisions. These efforts are being added, thinking about connectivity. And the participation scheme is maintained throughout the process. There is an offer of technical support to generate these activities, and there is also a scheme of monitoring compliance of those agreements. Other agreements that the SL supports are these that have also been explained in very concrete examples in this session of co-management or political agreements, as they are known for the Colombian case. And this is what we think is precisely necessary, those spaces that and those agreements between the authorities managing the areas protected and indigenous authorities who have rights over their territories, strengthening governance and management schemes, co-responsible management among different authorities. In this way, in addition, the mosaic of landscape are being preserved with different strategies. The SAL, in its mandate to promote the exchange of experiences, has provided two concrete examples under this subject, two of which the exchange that was made in 2019 in Madre de Dios, Peru, where both Brazilians, Colombian, and Peruvians from other regions went to learn from the experience of co-management in the territory. And additionally, at the SL, we supported and recognized the workshop and the World Conversations meeting organized by Gaia, Iepé, ISA, and IBC in Peru, where there was a great opportunity for indigenous authorities to exchange within the three countries governance and territorial rights in their territory. Another type of other level agreements are cross-sectoral agreements, considering that, or In order to influence policies directly, promoting the incorporation of guidelines and sustainable practice criteria in the interventions of other sectors in the Amazon. As an example of this, there are multi-sectoral agreements to mitigate and reduce the impacts of mercury pollution because of the use and activities of illegal mining and small-scale gold mining, or incorporating environmental criteria into transport management plans, road plans, or intersectoral tables on agricultural value chains. It can be coffee, and some examples include cocoa and livestock farming. In this way, other efforts that are joined in this idea of being able to connect landscapes and connect decision makers about landscapes. It is also important, and other agreements have been supported at another scales between donors, which are also the ones who make decisions about funding and adding to these landscapes. In this area, SL has supported coordination and sought to support improved coordination, complementary, and search for synergies among partners. And studies have been conducted on international financing in the last few years over or regarding the Amazon, and now the organization is on its way to identify what lessons learned from such effective cooperation. Finally, SL is essentially an agreement between governments, agreements that were established during the preparation of the program and its first and second phases, but which are maintained and developed during the implementation of the program, seeking to promote dialogue not only within countries but among countries, promoting a joint vision of what is needed and or what is the contribution that the program will make in conservation and sustainable development in these areas of program intervention. So in terms of areas of intervention, to give you an example, there are 210 protected areas only in the first phase among the three countries where the program was created, and obviously the idea is to look for landscapes and considering the multiplicity of factors, seeking that bridge between government, civil society, and community authorities. Of course, it is worth mentioning that the SL is part of a concrete example within the Leticia Pact. It is one of the examples of these inter-country collaborative efforts enshrined in the Leticia Pact, which, as many of you know, it was signed by 7 Amazon countries to promote regional conservation efforts. You have less than a minute, Ana Maria, so you can finish. Sure, I will finish by saying that the idea with SL is precisely to connect people and institutions to connect landscapes, where the importance of generating local benefits is very clear, benefits for local communities, to make it harmonious with local environmental benefits that are national, subnational, and also global. And we are confident that we can continue to support these dialogues and these joint efforts with multiple actors to manage landscapes sustainably and replicate these efforts to other regions of the Amazon. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ana Maria. We can see a wonderful example of a well-oriented project. Eyewitnesses all the extraordinary support provided by a project like this to the management and can be done in protected areas with the indigenous territories, with the community, which energizes the work. Thank you very much. And this is good news for the rest of the countries that you mentioned. Thank you, Ana Maria. So for the final part of the panel, we are going to ask a couple of questions to each of the panelists. And in that order, I'm going to begin with Martin. So in order to talk about governance, and as we saw in Francisco's words about
sobre el
Yaigoje
lenguaje
and indigenous
y el gobierno
government.
indígena, y él
And
habla
there is a
en
wider
Escocia,
region
perdón,
of
de
4
una
million
región más
hectares,
amplia de
which
4
is
millones de
called
hectáreas
macro
con
territory. I
lo que
just
hemos llamado
wanted
el
to
macro
highlight
territorio.
that
Y
right now
simplemente quería
he's already there
resaltar que en este
holding
momento
meetings
mucha
with
gente
all the
está ya
indigenous councils
haciendo reuniones
because they are
con todos
right
los
now in the
consejos indígenas
process
porque están en el
of
proceso de
setting
escoger en
up
este momento
an
de montar
administrative political
un
government, a
gobierno pues
territorial
administrativo,
equivalent
una entidad territorial
entity
equivalente
equivalent
a
to
los municipios.
municipalities. And they
Y no
are
solamente están
discussing how to make
discutiendo
governance
cómo hacer la gobernanza,
because
porque ha llegado
Gaia
la región
is
y
already
Gaia también está
discussing
discutiendo con ellos
everything
toda
that
la
is
cuestión de red food, es
related
decir, la
to
forma en
the
que todos
funding
estos
that is
dineros
coming for
por la conservación de los bosques y los
conservation
bosques y los
and carbon
certificados de
certificates.
carbono.
And all of this needs great
Esto necesita
planning.
una gran planeación.
So the
Entonces están
local
haciendo una serie de reuniones locales
meetings
e ir
have been
montando
taking
todo
place,
esto,
strengthening indigenous
fortaleciendo los planes de manejo indígena, los
management
planes de manejo de los
plans, all the
bosques,
entire local governance
todo el
system.
sistema de
And I
gobernanza
think
local.
this is
Y yo creo que esto
also
va a ser
this also will
un
be an
ejemplo
example
también de
of
cómo
how to
construir
build
con la gente
with the
desde
people
abajo,
from
con
the
indígenas que
base,
ya son
with
gobiernos,
indigenous
porque son entidades
people,
públicas de
the
carácter federal,
national
coordinado con el gobierno
government,
nacional
in
para
order
lograr realmente
to
la conservación
achieve
del medio ambiente y el
environmental conservation
fortalecimiento
and the
de las
strengthening of
comunidades y las
communities
culturas
and
a partir de
culture
su
based
visión propia y articulado con la
with the technology
tecnología
of the Western
multioccidental.
world. So here's
Entonces
a
aquí hay un
process that is
proceso
taking
que se
place
está
very
dando muy
strongly in the
fuerte
region
en estas regiones de
and
Yaigoje y
in
el
the macro
entorno del macro
territory. Thank you very
territorio.
much, Martin. We see how this purpose of this Nor-Amazon alliance fulfills, in this case, the need to strengthen the indigenous public authority and the community to participate. Also, of course, the ancestral culture that Gaia has dedicated to preserve in order to ensure that it's transmitted from generation to generations so they can exercise better control over their territory and to generate the results for conservation and good living and quality of life of indigenous groups in the territory. Thank you very much. So, Fabián, I will ask you the following. How do you consider that this initiative can really strengthen the concept that it is desirable while defining high ambition goals for the next negotiation of the Convention of Biological Diversity? How it can be an example to follow that shows us the path to the goals that we need to negotiate at the next meeting of the conference of the parties. Thank you, Julia. I think that we need a very territorialized approach or a localized approach. So at a national level, negotiations can be a little cold, but peoples of the territories, municipalities, communities, I think they are willing to conserve a territory as wide as possible because now people are realizing very quickly everything that is going on in terms of available resources, amount of water, climate. Yesterday, I was with a leader from the Shuar-Aka community, and they told us the world that they knew has changed very quickly, and they want to leave something for the next and future generations. What can we do from that territorial space? They are willing to conserve everything. So there is a clash with the central state because the state has other purposes for those territories, let's say the resources. And I think we need to reach a negotiation as close as possible to the territories in order to achieve these international goals that we have set ourselves. I think that it can be over 30%, which is a fairly large effort considered to what was achieved until 2020. Everything through the territorial vision, local planning, and the use of competence that the local governments have to establish conservation areas from their own management and management figures. This is obviously coordinated with the central state, but with a vision from at a local level. It shows the work of the challenge that we have to move forward. It's testimony of a person who sees the world differently in the course of his life, the years in which his life has elapsed. That shows us the speed at which we are changing our planet. So next we have Corine. Corine, I wanted to ask you something. You have a wonderful initiative. You are leading it along with the community organizations, but as you well explained, the initiative is starting on a firm foot. And I really want to know if you have already identified with the research that has been carried out and with a very hopeful perspective, real results in strengthening culture, people's good living, to the preservation of the ecosystem, and in this way, how can you attract more followers to your initiative? That is a great question. First, I am not leading it by myself. It is a whole herd of people who are dreaming together, and I think that's what's beautiful so far. I loved Fabian's answer. I thought it was great. I think we need to have something that makes sense for the territory, and I feel that there is so much to be done, and in this time, the last year and a half, we have lost ground. We are seeing more pressure on these sites when we talk to people. It is clear that illegal activities are taking over this space more and more. I see a biological corridor, a cultural important corridor, but it is also a drug dealing corridor, narco trafficking, illegal activities, illegal mining, and so on. So I think it is an important moment to see how we can really work on something holistic, where people feel we're there to support them not only on conservation issues, but for a complete conservation that includes health issues, communication issues, somewhere where we can support legally in those spaces, so there is an alternative to illegal. So far, one of the greatest results has been that people who are in that territory and who work there feel identified with this big vision. And there are people looking for financial resources to support their projects within the basin under the framework of the Grand Corridor. And obviously what Ana Maria mentioned and the World Bank and Jeff commitment on thinking about how to include Brazil and Ecuador efforts is super important. And those are the most important results to date. It is important to be able to return to the territory, always talk to the people, linking more and more people to create something very coherent between local, regional in each country at a national and an international level. And there, a space like COPE is important, but also by national cabinet spaces between countries. We need to act under the same vision, and it still seems to be a very big challenge to have all set. Thank you very much, Corine. I see that every project has something wonderful, which is to work with the people there in the territory to make them see how they are part of a great global strategy and to show them that what they do is important at a global level, not only at a local level, but also at a global level, and also taking them from the little piece of land in a way to say, to work with other institutions, with other organizations and other countries, as the example you have given us today. Thank you very much. So now we will ask a question for Decio. Maybe talking about your work and the work you are doing there. Is it possible to link the national government by showing the extraordinary results that you're getting in order to obtain institutional support, even when showing what you are doing as a successful experience for the negotiation at the Biodiversity COP? Thank you very much, Julia, for the question. I may not answer your question, but considering the current strategy, I would say that we are very influenced by a particular situation that we are facing with this government, perhaps inspired by other governments. There is a willingness to break these international agreements that have been recognized by Brazil and which are part of the Brazilian laws as well. So I would say that us and many communities, mainly the indigenous communities in the Amazon, are struggling, but in the short term, perhaps thinking about trying to keep their territories in various situations for some time, hoping that the situation changes, maybe to take that vision back a little more in the long term. I would say that in a good way, in recent months, this government has already shown a certain reaction to international pressure. I would tell you that the international pressure is already positively affecting the government. And the government is trying to reverse its radical positions. But unfortunately, in practice and along with communities, the effect of statements or perhaps not so clear vision of, for example, illegal mining, which is something that for some reason is very close to the president, despite the fact that there is no specific legislation in this regard. And that, for that reason, many communities have to deal with short-term problems of invasions and illegal mining that have arisen in recent months. I would say that along with that short-term strategy, we have made a great commitment to the development of production chains of forest products, not timber. So maybe this strategy, in addition to the medium and long term, along with the Amazon communities, that regardless of some form of government support, they can continue to develop those chains, develop products that they can justify that conservation, and they allow those communities to maintain those territories in a healthy way. Thank you very much, Decio. Your answer is very interesting. You didn't avoid the question. Thank you very much. So now I want to ask Ana Maria, continue with Ana Maria, and I would like to ask her opinion on how this important sustainable landscapes Amazon program can help demonstrate the benefits and successes of the connectivity strategy in the different projects that are being carried out. Because we are sure that if we do not demonstrate, if we do not prove the effectiveness of the implementation of these strategies, connectivity of working with the community, the strengthening the indigenous culture to achieve real results in conservation, in welfare of the community, we will not be able to continue to promote and show the donors the benefits of this strategy, and hopefully also by demonstrating it, we can ensure that this work schemes is adopted by negotiators at COP15. Go ahead, Ana Maria. Thank you, Julia. It is a complex question because in order to begin without going to monitoring and impacts measuring field, the challenge is that we have a regional program. So how do we add measurable results at a country level so that they can be presented at the program level? And additionally, the methodologies are different, and the interpretations of what is the effectiveness of the handling is also different. And how the great park directors that you were, you know how the measures to evaluate effectiveness of management in protected areas. And with those measures, we have been able to create indicators that shows us a result. So the program, for example, is responsible to measure and improve management effectiveness in 66 million protected areas. Among the three countries, I am talking about only the first phase. The second phase has not started to count how many millions of hectares are. But out of those 66 million hectares in last year's report, it was possible to identify that the effectiveness of management has been improved, including that indicator composed of several variables that make it the effective protected areas in 48 million hectares. The ones that are missing, it was not because they did not improve their handling, but given the COVID-19 context, it was not possible to measure it or could not be reported. And that is also part of the complexity and how difficult this year has been. Despite the results, some things we cannot know because we have lost access to the territory. But it is significant to be able to report that even this year, 48 million hectares, which is a lot of protected areas, we have been able to cover them. There are challenges, of course. For example, those measures, to what extent they respond to the local people, as Fabián was proposing. If the effectiveness of that management identified by those responsible for protected areas, when they are making management structures with the indigenous territories, they evaluate this as an achievement, and I would think that should be ideal. Like the case of the Apaporis that Gaia mentioned. So the director or the manager of that national park, when considering measuring, they consider it as something additional and as a benefit and a positive and significant result. The possibility to being able to manage results is broad, has the challenge. And the challenge is to make it harmonious, and the participation of communities in these participatory processes is also essential. If we are considering this example of the effectiveness of management in protected areas, the director of that protected area is not going to do the measuring, but rather the idea is to generate these processes where indigenous and non-indigenous communities and the inhabitants of those protected areas, if they can say that effectiveness has improved or not. And in that way, an assessment is actually generated, and that is beyond necessary. I have to say that there is a constant responsibility to report to donors, but also that is monitoring and the evaluation process and improvement process, and the communities are internalized so that actions are improved, so that decision makers at all levels take action on whether we are better, worse, or if there is a way forward. So that would be my assessment. But if you ask me to report and can fortunately give reports, very positive reports, even in spite of the difficulties of this year. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ana Maria. It is that way. In those territories, the measurement of the effectiveness has to be done jointly with indigenous peoples or with the inhabitants of these very extensive regions, because I realize the challenge that you have in terms of area that you need to measure and the correct and effective investment of resources. That is very important. Thank you very much. So, this series of talks of the North Amazon Alliance that integrates initiatives of civil society organizations, that includes the presence of 6 countries of the Amazon basin, really has a fundamental contribution to those who must make the best decisions to guide the future of the planet. So I am sure that the rich talk that we have had and the contribution of each of you will be very important in illustrating these individual cases, in showing the importance of this connectivity strategy between indigenous territories, protected areas, to measure not only ecosystem conservation, but also protection of the culture and quality of life of those who are an integral part of this territory. Martin, would you like to add something else? Julia, excuse me, Martin. Sorry for the interruption. I would like to mention something related to what Ana Maria was saying, if I may, on the national report subject. Maybe 30 seconds. Of course, Fabián, go ahead. Thank you very much. So, regarding the management effectiveness and the areas that are in the conservation, what happens in Ecuador and Peru is that many areas are not being reported by states because they are areas of local efforts, areas of subnational governments, and they are not reported in the national system of protected areas, even though they have management mechanisms, resources for financing, etc. Several things that are done there from the local efforts are not reported by the national states because they have not been recognized by the Ministry of the Environment in the case of Ecuador. So all of these other conservation areas, I think they must be accounted for, and they are the reflection of the importance that they have for connectivity between protected areas in the national system, and also for the need of co-financing, because communities, local governments, citizens are providing resources to protect their water source, connectivity territory, landscape area, but this is not being supported by the central government or even cooperation in many cases. So I think we need to make efforts to reflect the contribution of those local territories have towards conservation and national data. Thank you very much, Fabian. You're absolutely right. Martin? Thank you, Julia. I think this presentation has been excellent. Thank you all. I think it is essential to me, all the changes that we're making in practice, that community participation is the participation of indigenous peoples. And I would like to highlight and something that has not been mentioned so far. We have to talk about changes, vision of a fundamental model. In many parts, including Colombia, we are talking about the rights of nature, or nature as a subject of law, and the courts have declared it as such. And the whole Colombian Amazon maybe doesn't know what to do with it. The Constitution already establishes that, the Ecuador Constitution, and many parts of the world. But what does it mean? I think it's a paradigm shift, going back to what you mentioned before in these discussions today. We think of a community that we are part of. I think the indigenous peoples who understand that is put the importance of in their culture. The contribution to the discussion becomes important. If we're going to talk about conservation of ecosystems and biodiversity, the concept of rights, nature, it seems so fundamental. But the indigenous peoples know it. The indigenous peoples are the ones who have worked, they have lived it all their lives, they have developed in their social structure, in their conceptual structure, and the vision of the world. And that's why I think it's so important, not just your participation daily. Maybe it's about the future, not something of the past. It is something that can give us light regarding living with nature, living with ecosystems and biodiversity. So I think this has been excellent. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your own contribution. Thank you, Julia, for moderating this session. And I think it is essential that we are showing that it is possible to build with people. People are fundamental in building this thinking. It is essential. And there is where we have to change. Thank you very much. And thank you, Julia. So there is a new model that our planet needs to be able to move forward, to live in harmony with nature. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.